In this video, we continue our journey westward on our mission to visit all of the disused stations along the former Chicago Great Western Railroad, from Chicago to Owens, Iowa. This time, we'll pick up where we last left off, in Sycamore in DeKalb County, Illinois, and head westward over the northern Illinois prairie, where we'll visit 4 stations, starting with Wilkinson and closing with Lindenwood, 18 miles to the west. On our journey, we'll explore artifacts of interest between these stations.
Departing Sycamore, we drive only a mile down the road, west along Illinois Route 64, before we arrive at the ruins of a Chicago Great Western Bridge that once spanned the south branch of the Kishwaukee River, heading east-west. It's still fully accessible via a handy parking area just off the road. The bridge span was originally approximately 100 feet between the 2 concrete abutments, supported by 3 large concrete piers midstream, the piers being about 25 feet apart. This would have been a steel girder bridge, akin to the one shown here, and including the approaches, the bridge was likely well over 100 feet from east to west. The bridge is still used today, but as a home for local wildlife.
To the west of the bridge, the old railway line starts to veer off northwest of Illinois Route 64. To get to the next station on the route, Wilkinson, we head west on Route 64 for about 3 miles. Then turn north onto Glidden Road. About a third of a mile along Glidden, we turn left into the parking area for the Wilkinson-Renwick Marsh Nature Area. A short walk, just a little more than 500 feet, along the paved nature trail brings us to the site of the former Wilkinson Station. An interpretive sign marks the spot of the former depot. The Wilkinson Station was located in Mayfield Township of DeKalb County, Illinois, and from the early 1900s onwards was the first stop to the west of Sycamore, a little more than 5 miles down the line.
The station was originally built in 1905 and served as a junction and interlocking station for the Chicago Great Western and the newly built Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota Railway, running north-south. This new railway later changed its name to the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Gary Railway, and eventually became part of the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railway. For the Chicago Great Western, it was a boon because it now gave the railway a direct line into Rockford, another large passenger and freight market, which it previously lacked. CGW passengers and freight heading to and from Rockford could disembark here and then re-embark onto their connecting train going east-west or north and south.
Although the station is now long gone, amidst the foliage you can still see this substantial stone foundation which once bore its weight, measuring perhaps 25 feet by 65 feet, aligned east-west. A heavy foundation was needed, as the station was built entirely of brick with a hip roof. It stood at the southeast corner of the intersection of the 2 railways. The station was used primarily for freight, not appearing on passenger timetables until the mid-1910s. Extensive sidings for this freight interchange reached several hundred feet to the east of the station. In its later years, the interchange of coal freight between railway lines was one of its primary operations. The station, however, seems to have gone out of use by the 1950 timeframe.
To the east of the Wilkinson Station stood a interlocking building, somewhat smaller than the station building. This interlocking station was manually operated from 1905 until about 1935, when an automatic interlocker was installed. To the south of the station foundation, old railroad ties are still strewn along the path, embedded in the trail.
The Wilkinson Station was named for Ralph Newton Wilkinson, the local farmer and landowner of the property on which the station was situated. The Wilkinson family was among the early settlers of DeKalb County, Illinois, and Ralph Wilkinson was born in the area in 1858. Later, he married Hattie Hennigan, and their union produced one son, David. In addition to being a prosperous farmer, Ralph was also a local justice of the peace, as well as a member of the school board. He died in 1929, while Hattie passed away in 1944. Both are buried in Elmwood Cemetery in Sycamore, Illinois.
U.S. Geological survey maps indicate that the station had been demolished by the late 1960s. Once the remaining Chicago Great Western trackage and infrastructure had been removed, by the early 1970s, the marshy area became a favorite haunt for duck hunters. More recently, in the 1990s, the 46-acre site was purchased by the DeKalb County Forest Preserve District, when it was shortly thereafter restored as the Wilkinson-Renwick Marsh. The next station along the CGW route was Clare, about 2¼ miles to the west-northwest. For us, though, it will be a little more than 3½ miles by automobile.
We depart the Wilkinson-Renwick Marsh area and head south on Glidden Road until we reach Illinois Route 64. Turning westward, we travel for almost 2½ miles before turning north again. This time onto Clare Road, where we drive for almost a mile before entering the small hamlet of Clare, an unincorporated community in DeKalb County, Illinois.
Just to our right, about 250 feet east of Clare Road, we can see the old Clare CGW station still standing, somewhat worse for wear, and with an addition on the west side of the building. But it is still very much a functional and useful building today, being used for storage by the landowner, who lives just to the south of the old station. And yes, we did make sure to ask the property owner for permission prior to venturing onto their land.
The Clare Station stood on the north side of the tracks. It was, and is, a wooden frame structure, about 25 feet by 55 feet in size, with gable ends, and of classic CGW Victorian stick-style design. There were once considerable sidings to the south of the trackway, extending 1,000 feet both to the east and west of the depot. A creamery was located to the north of the station, which did good business for a number of years. As such, the station was used for a long time as a milk stop for local farmers, even well after the creamery went out of business. The station also handled passenger traffic, as well as other freight, including U.S. mail.
The town of Clare appears to have originated with the arrival of the CGW Railway in 1886, as the first newspaper references appear in 1887. The community was initially known as Holly, but then changed its name along with the station to Chadwick. However, this was short-lived as they soon discovered that there was already a Chadwick, Illinois, to the west in Carroll County. And so the town name was once again changed in 1887, this time to Clare, in reference to County Clare in Ireland, as many of the local inhabitants were of Irish descent. A post office was soon after established in Clare in 1890, which began the daily delivery of the U.S. mail. The Clare Post Office is still active today, just to the north of the station grounds. The Clare Depot continued doing both freight and passenger service until its closure in 1958. The next station along the CGW line was Esmond, a little more than 5.5 miles west-northwest. But along the way, we're going to take a little detour to see whether we can find the remains of a small CGW bridge that once spanned Owens Creek, just 1.5 miles from here.
We depart Clare and head north a short distance, turning west onto West Clare Road. We take this road for a little more than 1.5 miles until reaching Schaefer Road, where we turn north. A quarter of a mile further brings us to the former crossing of the CGW line with Schaefer Road, where we'll park along the side of the road.
The small bridge that we're after is located on Owens Creek and is on private property. And as we don't know who the property owners are, we'll use a drone to do some limited bridge spotting. The former bridge is located about 1,000 feet east of our current position, along Schaefer Road, and well within the range of the drone. However, there are strong, warm south winds blowing today, at 15 to 20 miles per hour, so we'll have to be somewhat careful as we negotiate the trees encircling the bridge site, as we don't want to get blown into a tree or knocked into Owens Creek.
But the flight is well worth it, because straight off we can see the concrete abutment on the east side of the former bridge, which originally had a span of perhaps 30 feet. Negotiating to get an angle on the western side, there's still a fair amount of foliage covering the area, but we can just see the lower portion of a stone or concrete abutment on the west side of the creek. So a bit nerve-wracking, but success.
Back on the road on our way to the Esmond Station, we head north along Schaefer Road for 1 mile, then turn west onto Old State Road. We travel on this road for almost 4 miles before turning south onto Esmond Road. One mile down on Esmond Road, we see an open area to our left, flanked by a collection of huge grain elevators, along Stickney Street, almost certainly named for Alpheus Bede Stickney, the Chicago Great Western founder. This open area was where the Esmond Station, which is unfortunately no more, once stood.
Like the Clare Station, the Esmond Station was located on the north side of the trackway, about 250 feet east of Esmond Road and 140 feet west of Stickney Street, in the unincorporated community of Esmond, in South Grove Township, DeKalb County, Illinois. Period photos tell us that it was a large wood frame structure, about 25 feet wide by 65 feet long, east to west, with the typical Chicago Great Western Victorian stick-style design details. There was a large set of sidings to the south of the tracks, extending several hundred feet on both the east and west sides of Esmond Road. A creamery and grain elevator stood beyond these sidings, on the south side of the trackway.
Back when the station lottery opened up for potential stations along the CGW line in DeKalb County in the mid-1880s, it was local farmer George J. Detmer who traveled from farm to farm, convincing his neighbors and promoting a train station being established in the midst of their community. In the end, he was successful, and in 1886, Esmond Station was planted in the midst of the agricultural community referred to as Deerfield Prairie, which already had a local U.S. post office. The new town of Esmond then sprung up from the newly established train station in 1887 and subsumed the post office responsibilities of both Deerfield Prairie and nearby Dustin. The station and town name of Esmond remains obscure, however, and so if any of our viewers has information on that, please let us know in the comments.
Local farmers primarily leveraged the Esmond Station for freighting livestock, grain, and dairy products. Stockyards were built close by the station to accommodate their brisk livestock shipping business. Local children from these rural communities would also take the train to and from school in Sycamore, going on a bit of a daily adventure, riding the train every day to school.
Train timetables tell us that the Esmond Station stayed in operation from the earliest days of the railway until about 1963, when it no longer appears to be used, either for freight or passenger service. For a decade thereafter, the station continued to be employed as something of a community center, at least until the early 1970s, when the railway formally closed the building down. The Esmond Station was eventually torn down, sometime after the early 1970s. The small community of Esmond, however, still remains, now centered on the adjacent grain silo and elevator complex, which dominates the former station site. The next station along this route is Lindenwood, a little more than 5 miles west-northwest, and in the adjacent county of Ogle, Illinois. But just as before, we're going to make a few detours to explore the ruins of 2 small bridges between here and Lindenwood.
The first of these bridges is located on Spring Run Creek, with no clear access, about 2 3/4 miles west-northwest of Esmond. Like the previous bridge, this bridge is also on private property and lies some distance from the nearby road along the former trackway, marked by a ridge of trees and brush. The south wind is still very strong, gusting between 15 to 25 miles per hour. Fortunately, it's a straight shot over a field of crops to get to the bridge, although the bridge area is surrounded by trees.
We're fighting the wind as the drone heads towards the bridge site. Once there, we have a clear shot of the concrete abutments on both the east and west side of the bridge. As there is more of an opening here, we'll swing around to the other side to see whether we can get a closer look. And there it is, an exceptional and clear view of both concrete abutments of this former bridge, with a span of perhaps 20 feet across. A small excursion well worth the time.
According to maps, the next bridge is expected to be even larger and spans the Killbuck Creek, approximately 2/3 of a mile east of the former Lindenwood Station, and just to the east of U.S. Interstate 39. There's no easy way to access the bridge via a road or walking, so again we'll have to use the drone for reconnaissance. We had to search around for a safe place from which to fly the drone, and which enabled visual line of sight. We eventually found a suitable place along a road to the south of the bridge. Like the previous site, it will be a clear flight over cropland until we reach a small forest within which runs the meandering Killbuck, and along which we'll find our bridge.
As the afternoon wears on, the wind has picked up and is even stronger, perhaps 20 to 25 miles per hour. This bridge site is further complicated by a heavy cover of trees and lies about 150 feet east of Interstate 39, which runs north-south. We don't want the wind to push us into any trees, nor do we want to be pushed anywhere near the interstate. And so we have to be very mindful of the wind, flying at low altitude while yet staying above the trees. The other thing we'll have to be mindful of is that with the strong southwest wind, we'll have a strong push towards the site, but we'll have to have sufficient battery to get the drone back against a heavy wind.
We start out at a lower altitude over the open field until we arrive at the trees. Flying higher and above the forest may be a point of no return, as a sustained gust of wind may take the drone with it, so we proceed with caution. We fly forward slowly, and within a few tens of seconds see the interstate going over the Killbuck to the west, so we know the bridge must be nearby. After a little searching, we find remains of the bridge in the form of a large concrete pier in the middle of the Killbuck. We can also discern that close by another pier is missing, only 3 steel posts projecting out of the water. With a little maneuvering in this tight spot, we can also get a clear shot of the west abutment, which is still in good shape. However, due to overhanging trees, we're not able to get a good view of the east abutment.
But from what we can observe, the original span of this bridge appears to have been on the order of 80 feet, with 2 channel piers and 2 abutments. An attempt to lower the drone for a closer inspection of the bridge results in a temporary loss of signal. Not good. Rather than push our luck, we'll head back. And it's a good thing that we did, as we fight the wind the entire return flight. The drone makes it safe home, and we breathe a sigh of relief. Thankful that the drone returned safely, and very glad that we positively identified another CGW bridge artifact in the landscape. We'll backtrack a bit to get a clear ride into Lindenwood, from where we embarked in Esmond. From Esmond, we approach Lindenwood from the east, heading along Lindenwood Road for almost 5 miles. Until we reach Walnut Street, where we turn south. We'll proceed a half mile along Walnut until we see a few looming banks of giant grain elevators to our right. We'll pull in and park along the elevator complex, as the Lindenwood Station site is just a short distance from them.
The Chicago Great Western's Lindenwood Depot is unfortunately no longer with us. But according to aerial photos, it once stood about 300 feet west of Walnut Street and 150 feet south of First Street in Lindenwood, in Linville Township, Ogle County, Illinois. That puts the former station site directly south of the white Linville Township building. The station stood on the north side of the tracks, the same as Esmond and Clare, and consisted of a wooden structure, approximately 50 feet long by 25 feet wide. Period photos show that it had the classic CGW design, with a gabled roof in the Victorian stick style. To the south of the depot lay a considerable siding, extending for several hundred feet. A large water tank and windmill stood to the west of the depot. A creamery and grain elevators stood on the south side of the trackways and a bit west of the station. And just west of these buildings were a long line of livestock pens, which at their peak could hold up to 30,000 sheep. Yes, sheep, not cows. This configuration of buildings and infrastructure tells the tale of this station, as it was used primarily for shipping freight, dairy products, livestock, and grain to market.
The town of Lindenwood and the Lindenwood Station have a more complicated history. Lindenwood had its origins in the 1830s as the town of Linville in Linville Township, both being named for an early Ogle County settler. The village was a small but thriving rural settlement with a church and schoolhouse and a scattering of buildings. By 1850, the Lindenwood Post Office, serving Linville Township, was established just a half mile to the south of Linville, for reasons that are not obvious. The Lindenwood name might refer to a few Linden families that lived in the area, although its origins remain obscure.
With the coming of the railway, the Chicago Great Western naturally wanted to align its stations with post offices, as freighting the U.S. mail was a good business for them. And so the new CGW station was built in 1887, close by the Lindenwood Post Office, and took the Lindenwood name. Bolstered by the lucrative business of the new railway, Lindenwood sprang to life. Over time, the new town spread northwards towards Linville, until the two effectively merged, with the merged communities eventually taking the Lindenwood name in the early 1900s.
The Chicago Great Western's Lindenwood Station faithfully served this agricultural community for more than 70 years, or 3 generations, before it closed down in 1958. It is not yet clear how long the Lindenwood Station stood before being torn down, but USGS maps suggest that it may have been removed by the early 1970s. Today, the former station site has been repurposed for Linville Township buildings, with a location again dominated by enormous grain silos and elevators, which, as we've seen, had their very origins in the railroad station that vanished long ago.
We'll end the segment of our Chicago Great Western journey here in Lindenwood, Illinois. If you're enjoying these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. We really do appreciate it. In the next episode of this series, we'll continue onwards across the fertile croplands and meandering waterways of Ogle County, towards Holcomb, Stillman Valley, and Byron. We'll see you then.